Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box below, along with the original source material and the link to my book so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Secret Doctrine with stanza 7, the fifth race and its divine instructors. 47. Few men remained, some yellow, some brown and black, and some red remained. The moon-colored, of the primitive divine stock, were gone forever. 48. The fifth race, produced from the holy stock, remained. It was ruled by her first divine kings. 49. The serpents who redescended, who made peace with the fifth race, who taught and instructed it. This verse, 47, relates to the fifth race. History does not begin with it, but living and ever-recurring tradition does. History, or what is called history, does not go back further than the fantastic origins of our fifth sub-race, a few thousands of years. It is the subdivisions of this first sub-race of the fifth root race, which are referred to in the sentence. Some yellow, some brown and black, and some red remained. The moon-colored, in example, the first and second races, were gone forever, aye, without leaving any traces whatsoever, and that, so far back as the third deluge of the third Lemurian race, that great dragon whose tail sweeps whole nations out of existence in the twinkling of an eye. And this is the true meaning of the verse in the commentary that says, the great dragon has respect but for the serpents of wisdom, the serpents whose holes are now under the triangular stones, in example, the pyramids at the four corners of the world. This tells us clearly that what is mentioned more than once elsewhere in the commentaries, namely, that the adepts or wise men of the three races, the third, fourth, and fifth, dwelt in subterranean habitats, generally under some kind of pyramidal structure. What? The serpents made peace with, who redescended, made peace with the fifth race, who taught and instructed. That does not clearly say anything at all. That literally says nothing, right? Unless you are indoctrinated, unless you are in the club, right? These three put together do not say that there was anybody living subterraneally. It says redescended. That could be from heaven to here. Now, we don't believe in heaven, right? That's a fallacy of Christianity in specificity. But this does not necessarily mean that, right? It does not clearly state, right? This tells us clearly that what is mentioned more than once elsewhere in the commentaries, not the stanza, the commentaries upon the stanza, what somebody said about the thing that was written, right? Not the thing that was written, what somebody said about the things that were written. And we've already hit many times that her parentheticals are not necessarily true at all. Clearly mentioned that the adepts or wise men of the three races, the third, the fourth, and the fifth, dwelt in the subterranean habitats is not clearly stated. It is not clearly stated. Generally under some kind of pyramidal structure, right? Now, this comes from the commentary. This does not come from the stanzas. This comes from somebody explaining it. Now, I have a different explanation for the Great Dragon. Y'all want to know it? 12,000-year disaster cycle will clue you in on more of this, but I believe that there's going to be a sign of destruction in the sky that comes. Many, many different people say that, and they all say that it's going to resemble a dragon. It's going to be like the great fiery serpent of old. There will be something in the sky that is clearly identifiable to every single human being on the entirety of the planet. And they're going to look at that and they go, oh, that's what they were talking about. I believe that it is going to resemble a great dragon. It is going to be sinuous. It's going to be in the sky, and it might descend. That would be an explanation for this. Now, serpents of wisdom, this is the commentary, right? The serpents was the club. That was the club in which you had to be initiated. So the great dragon has respect for the serpents. This thing, this God or whatever they're trying to intimate that this is, has respect for my club. It's my club that's the right one. My club is the one that's going to tell you the right thing. My club is the one that's going to give you the right information. Never mind the fact that this is not mentioned in the stanzas. Back to the text. Generally under some kind of pyramidal structure, if not actually under a pyramid. For such pyramids existed in the four corners of the world and were never the monopoly of the land of the pharaohs, though until found scattered all over the two Americas, over and underground, beneath and amidst virgin forest, as in plain and vale, they were supposed to be the exclusive property of Egypt. Now this part is true, right? There are pyramids that have been built across the entirety of the globe, and it's not necessarily in four corners, right? That's the important part to take out of this, is there are no corners on a globe, right? Now, metaphorically, you can say Egypt is one and South America is another. Fine, whatever. Peru has pyramids. Guatemala has pyramids. Mexico has pyramids. Bolivia has pyramids. Belarus has some pyramids, I'm pretty sure. Like, there are pyramids in Europe. There are pyramids in Asia. There are pyramids in South America. Maybe in Mexico. Like, I'm fairly positive that we do not have pyramids in North America, right? If I am wrong with that, you are more than welcome to correct me. I would love to see that. We have mounds, right? Not exactly the same thing. But most of the places that have been populated for a great deal of time do have pyramids. They are not the same in structure. There is no reason to believe that they were built by the exact same culture, right? There are similarities, but there has to be similarities in structures that are built in a very specific way. But they're not all the same. They are different. But they do exist. That is a thing which is true, right? It was Romania. That's where they found the ones in Europe. I'm sure there are more, but they found one in Romania that they thought it was a mountain, much like what happened in South America. They thought it was a mountain, and they started digging, and they found steps, and then they undid it, and it was a pyramid, right? That is a thing that is. And so this part is correct. But as far as living under the pyramid, despite very recent discoveries, there is no reason to believe it, right? There is access underneath the pyramids. That is an incontrovertible fact. You can go in through the descending chamber and you can find this thing that goes down, right? It has been partially filled with rubble and things of that nature to hide it. But recent laser technology has shown that there may be some structures that were built underneath the pyramid, and that is entirely possible. But it is not a proven fact as of now. Also, if that was a thing, there's no guarantee that it was a living situation. Now, have there been people who lived underground? Yes. The Hopi have their creation legend. Well, not really creation, but the beginning of this age for the Hopi was them coming out from underneath the ground. Other people have that too, and it was how they were saved from the flood. So I'm not discounting the live underground. The part that I'm discounting is the just categorically stating that that is a true thing. It's not, right? We may very well, very soon, receive evidence that will lead us to the conclusion that people did live under the pyramid. Or, at the very least, that there was a temple section underneath there, or that it was at least ceremonial in some capacity, right? Those are things that may very well be proven due to recent discoveries. But that doesn't mean right now that we can state that anybody lived there. It is a legend, fine. Acknowledge it as a legend, but not that it was exclusive to Egypt or anywhere else, or that it had to be a first, second, third, or fourth race. Like, it's also wild that she's bringing up the first and the second race when we're on the fifth, and they should have been long gone by now. But that's beside the point. That contradicts with the points that she's trying to make. There is also reason to believe that these, at least the Egyptian pyramids, were built over the top of an already existing structure. There is significant reason to believe that. And if that is true, that is going to push the date of the pyramid back significantly farther than it already is, and that it already is beyond our recorded history, right? Whenever Cleopatra ruled Egypt, we right now are closer to Cleopatra in time than Cleopatra was to the foundation of the pyramids. And that is using the scientifically accepted. It is almost, well, I don't even want to say almost a certainty, but there is definitely reason to believe that the pyramid structures are pre-deluge, that they are much older than is attributed by modern science. Egyptologists have no clue about their own fucking country, and it's wild. Anyway, back to the text. If the true geometrically correct pyramids are no longer found in European regions, many of the supposed early Neolithic caves of the colossal triangular, pyramidal, and conical menhirs in the Morbihan and Brittany generally, many of the Danish tumuli, and even of the giant tombs of Sardinia with their inseparable companions, the Norugai, are so many more or less clumsy copies of the pyramids. And again, this is not a fact, right? This is speculation. You are saying that these things were built as copies of the pyramid, and there is zero reason to believe that whatsoever. Now, I'm not sure where Morbihan is, but I do know where Brittany is, right? I know where the Danish are. That we do not have, as far as I'm aware, any pyramidical structures there. Even the things that are built are not necessarily pyramidal in shape. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. Anyway, it is important to remember that just because you believe a thing doesn't mean that it's true. And even if I haven't been to any of these sites, I'm not familiar with any of these sites that she's describing. And it may be that they are pyramidal in shape, but that doesn't mean that they were copying Egypt. It doesn't mean that there was a source that was the same. Now, I believe that there was, right? Don't ever forget that. But even if you believe something, you need to hold in your mind until it is fully fleshed out that it is speculation. She is speculating here with no reservations whatsoever. Once again, we do not know this. Now, these giant tombs in Sardinia, it may be, but there is no reason to believe at all that the pyramids on the Giza Plain and many of the others held any funerary remains ever whatsoever. There has been no reason whatsoever to believe that the pyramids were built as a tomb. None. Back to the text. Most of these are the works of some first settlers on the newly born continent and isles of Europe. The some yellow, some brown and black, and some red races that remained at the submersion of the last Atlantean continents and islands 850,000 years ago, with the exception of Plato's Atlantean island, which is a false reference. Once again, Atlantis was not an island, it was a continent. There were 10 kingdoms, right? If you're gonna talk about the source material, then you have to quote the source material correctly. And Plato never called it an island, right? Plato said that there was a continent. And yes, it is fully surrounded by water, but it is bigger than Australia. And so maybe we can look at it in a different manner. And I know it is too late for her to change her opinion, but this is a brand new thing. And some people that have not watched the rest of this study are going to watch this one, and they're going to be like, oh, so that tells me that Atlantis was an island. It was not. It was not an island any more than Australia is an island, right? I don't think even New Zealand is classified technically as an island because it's just so big. It may be. I may be wrong on that one. And technically speaking, any landmass that is completely encapsulated with water is going to be an island. But the size does play into it, right? Australia is both an island and a continent. It's going to be the exact same thing for Atlantis. It is not just some little island in the Azores. It was 10 large kingdoms, right? We are given the population of one of those 10 kingdoms, and it is huge. It is not small. It is not insignificant. It is a large population center, and it is only one of the 10 kingdoms. Again, see the Plato's Timaeus and Critias, where we talk about that in some extensive detail. With the exception of Plato's Atlantean island and before the arrival of the great Aryan races, while others were built by the earliest immigrants from the East. Those who can hardly accept the antiquity of the human race so far back as the 57,000 years assigned by Dr. Dowler to the skeleton found by him at New Orleans on the banks of Mississippi will, of course, reject these facts, but they may find themselves mistaken someday. It is the foolish self-glorification of the Arcadians who styled themselves Proselenoi, older than the moon, and the people of Attica who claimed that they had existed before the sun appeared in heaven, that we may disparage not their undeniable antiquity. Okay, let's talk about this one, because there are 2 points here that may not be correct. Right? Nobody was alive on the planet when it was created. That we can agree on. There is nobody here who had any record whatsoever of the formation of the planet. We can speculate about it through science and various things of that nature, but nobody was here. There are legends, however, of the formation of the moon. That is the thing. There is, I'm drawing a blank on the name. I've got it. The Enuma Elish details it in part. The Ancient Lore playlist, that's where we started. We've come a long way since then, so bear that with a grain of salt too. But there are legends that Tiamat, that's the legend. Once upon a time, this planet was not Earth, but was instead Tiamat. It was significantly larger and a little bit farther out in space. And at a point in history, we were struck by a large object from space. Now, this might be that dragon we were talking about. Bear that in mind. This impact shore off a large chunk of Earth and cast it out into the air, right? Out into space, where it formed the moon. That's the legend. I'm not saying that that is the truth, but that is the legend. And there is at least an element of truth in it, because if you did not know, we've been to the moon. Not only have we been to the moon, but we've taken samples, and the samples on the moon match the composition of the Earth. If it was a moon that was naturally developed, that is a highly unlikely thing, right? If we ever make it out to Jupiter, and it's, 11? One of them has 11 in. Anyway, if we make it out farther into space, and we go to the moons of the other planets, it is almost certain that they are composed of different materials than the planets themselves. That is not true for us. Also, the synchronous orbit, in a particular manner, facing a certain direction, is not normal. It can be explained through science and inertia if the impact did indeed happen. This locking in of the faces as it rotates around, that is probable to have come from this impact. Not definitive, but very probable. And so there could have been people on this planet who witnessed that event. Again, not saying that is necessarily true. Although, once again, I do believe that this part is true. This second part, right? They claim they existed before the sun appeared in heaven. Well, if you are unaware, there is another theory about things, and if any of this is true, it is entirely possible that once upon a time the planets were in a synchronous conjunction. Now, what do you mean by that? Once upon a time, I'm pretty sure it's Saturn, was the luminous object in our solar system. It held in stasis around it Venus, Mercury, and Mars. Now, I'm not fully fleshed in this particular thing. If you would like more information on this, other than what I'm about to say, the Thunderbolts Project is linked on my page, right? The YouTube page. If you go to it, the Thunderbolts Project is in there. And if you look up Stuart Talbert, you will find a video about the signs in the sky. This is what I'm talking about. At some point, that synchronous orbit is disrupted. Now, that can be exactly at the same time that the moon was shorn off of the earth. That is entirely probable. It is, while not definitively scientifically proven, well on its way to being so. Now, I am not the scientist, right? I like science, I enjoy it, but I am not out there doing experiments. The guys over at the Thunderbolts Project, they are. They do the work. They put in the effort. They are letting you know the things. And so, definitely, if this interests you, fall back and check it out. But both of these legends are possible. Both of them. The sun may not have always been the only source of illumination that we had. That would explain the Hyperborea, right? The land where the sun never sets. If there were two illuminations, that would explain some things. Now, again, that is not saying that that is what did happen. It is simply an explanation of what could happen. But again, what she just stated here, that we may disparage these two myths, is completely unfounded. Now, in her time, that was something that nobody would even consider. But now, there are many reasons to believe that. Back to the text. Nor can we laugh at the universal belief that we had giant ancestors. The fact that the bones of the mammoth and mastodon, and in one case, those of a gigantic salamander, have been mistaken for human bones, does not make away with the difficulty that, of all the mammalians, man is the only one whom science will not allow to have dwarfed down. Like all other animal frames, from the giant Homo diluvi to the creature between 5 and 6 feet that he is now. But the serpents of wisdom have preserved their records well, and the history of human evolution is traced in the heavens as it is traced on underground walls. Humanity and the stars are bound together indissolubly because of the intelligences that rule the latter. Modern symbologists may scoff at this and call it fancy, but it is unquestionable that the deluge has ever been associated in the legends of some Eastern peoples, not only with the pyramids, but also with the constellations, writes Mr. Stanley Wake, The Great Pyramid. The old dragon is identical with the Great Flood, says Mr. Proctor in Knowledge. We know that in the past, the constellation of the dragon was at the pole, or boss, of the celestial sphere. In stellar temples, the dragon would be the uppermost or ruling constellation. It is singular how closely the constellations correspond in sequence and in range of right ascension with the events recorded respecting the biblical flood. The reasons for this singularity have been made clear in this work. That is a lie. But it shows only that there were several deluges. That is a truth. Mixed up with the memories and traditions of sub-races of the fifth race. Another lie. The first great flood was astronomical and cosmical. That is a assumption. While several others were terrestrial. That is a truth. Yet this did not prevent our very learned friend, Mr. Gerald Massey, an initiate truly in the mysteries of the British Museum, still only a self-initiate, from declaring and insisting that the Atlantean submersion and deluge were only the anthropomorphized fancies of ignorant people, and that Atlantis was no better than an astronomical allegory. That is foolish. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that the account from Plato was an astronomical allegory at all. And again, fall back and watch it, right? I read it for you. Nevertheless, the great zodiacal allegory is based upon historical events, and one can hardly interfere with the other. And it stands also to reason that every student of occultism knows what the astronomical and zodiacal allegory means. Smith shows in the Nimrod epic of the Assyrian tablets the real meaning of it. We've dealt with that. Its 12 cantos refers to the annual course of the sun through the 12 months of the year. Each tablet assigns answers to a special month and contains a distinct reference to the animal forms in the sign of the zodiac. It was not Nimrod we did, it was Gilgamesh, my bad. And I'm saying that because this was absolutely not contained in what I read, and it kicked the memory. So, the 11th canto being consecrated to Ramon, the god of storms and of rain, and harmonizes with the 11th sign of the zodiac, Aquarius, or the waterman. But even this is preceded in the old records by the pre-astronomical cosmic flood, which became allegorized and symbolized in the above zodiacal or Noah's flood. Those are not the same things. But this has nothing to do with Atlantis. The pyramids are closely connected with the ideas of both the Great Dragon, the constellation, and the Dragons of Wisdom. There is no reason to believe that either. Right? There is reason to believe that the pyramids of Giza are connected to Orion, but not the Great Dragon. There's no reason to believe that. Or the great initiates of the third and fourth races and the floods of the Nile, regarded as a divine reminder of the great Atlantic flood. Man, the leaps that people make. The astronomical records of the universal history, however, are said to have had their beginnings with the third subrace of the fourth root race, or the Atlanteans. When was it? Occult data shows that even since the time of the regular establishment of the zodiacal calculations in Egypt, the poles have been thrice inverted. Once again, see the 12,000-year disaster cycle. We will presently return once more to this statement. Such symbols as are represented by the signs of the zodiac, a fact which offers a handle to materialists upon which to hang their one-sided theories and opinions, have too profound a signification, and their bearing upon our humanity is too important to suffer dismissal in a few words. Meanwhile, we have to consider the meaning of that other statement which mentions the first divine kings, who are said to have redescended, guided, and instructed our fifth race after the last deluge. We shall consider this last claim historically in the sections that follow, but must end with a few more details on the subject of serpents. The Brotherhood of the Snake was indeed a club. The rough commentaries on the archaic stanzas have to end here. Further elucidation requires proofs obtained from ancient, medieval, and modern works that have treated on these subjects. All such evidence has now to be gathered in, collated, and brought together in a better order, so as to compel the attention of the reader to this wealth of historical proofs. And, as the manifold meaning of the weird symbol, so often referred to and suggestive of the tempter of man in the orthodox light of the Church, can never be too strongly insisted upon, it seems more advisable to exhaust the subject by every available proof at this juncture, even at the risk of repetition. The Titans and Kabirs have been invariably made out by our theologians and some pious symbologists as indissolubly connected with the grotesque personage called devil, and every proof to the contrary has been hitherto as invariably rejected and ignored. Therefore, the occultist must neglect nothing which may tend to defeat this conspiracy of slander. It is proposed to divide the subjects involved in these last 3 verses into several groups and examine them in this final chapter as carefully and as fully as space permits. A few more details may thus be added to the general evidences of antiquity on the most disputed tenets of occultism and the esoteric doctrine, the bulk of which will be found in Part 2 on symbology. Serpents and dragons under different symbolisms. The name of the dragon in Chaldea was not written phonetically, but was represented by 2 monograms, probably meaning, according to Orientalists, the scaly one. This description very pertinently, remarks G. Smith, of course applies either to a fabulous dragon, a serpent, or a fish. And we may add, it applies in one case to Makara, the 10th zodiacal sign, meaning, in Sanskrit, a nondescript amphibious animal, generally called crocodile, but really signifying something else, the mysteries of Hebdomad. This, then, is a virtual admission that the Assyriologists, at all events, know nothing certain as to the status of the dragon in ancient Chaldea, whence the Hebrews got their symbolism, only to be afterwards robbed of it by the Christians, who made the scaly one a living entity and a maleficent power. I'm not intimately familiar with the zodiacal wheel, right? I'm not sure what the 11th, or what did it say 11th? I think the 11th was the last one, right? This is the 10th. Yeah, the 10th zodiacal sign. But I'm fairly positive that we don't have a crocodile in there, so I don't know. I don't know that we have anything in the zodiac that can be construed even as a dragon. A specimen of dragons, winged and scaled, may be seen in the British Museum, representing the events of the fall, according to the same authority. There are also 2 figures sitting on each side of a tree, holding out their hands to the apple, while at the back of the tree is the dragon serpent. Esoterically, the 2 figures are the 2 Chaldees, ready for initiation. The serpent symbolizing the initiator, while the jealous god, who cursed the 3, are the exoteric profane clergy. Not much of the literal biblical event there, as any occultist can see. The great dragon has respect but for the serpents of wisdom, says the stanza, thus proving the correctness of our explanation of the 2 figures and the serpent. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. That and this do not have the same thing. A specimen of dragons may be seen in the British Museum, representing the events of the fall. So they were intentionally creating the events of the fall. Right now, again, I don't believe in the fall. I believe that we are here intentionally. This is not a punishment. We are not existing as punishment for immortal sins, right? But this exhibit in the British Museum represents the offense of the fall according to the authority that made it. But I have a better knowledge than you do. There are 2 figures sitting on each side of a tree holding out their hands to the apple, while at the back of the tree is the dragon serpent, climbing the tree, I'm assuming. Esoterically, the 2 figures are the Chaldees. Says you and you alone. Not the people who made it, not the people who are watching it, not the people who are enjoying it, just you. You have decided that this is what this means. Does not mean that that is what it means. And it also, right, this description that is given here doesn't say anything about God. It says that there were 2 figures on each side of the tree holding out their hands to the apple, and there was a dragon serpent on the tree. Where's the jealous God on this? Where's that at? Do we have that in this? No. But where is this the great dragon has respect for the serpents of wisdom in this? There's nothing in this outside of you deciding that these 2 people who are being represented intentionally are actually intentionally representing something else, right? This is a self-insertion to the nth degree. There is no reason to believe that the people who created this exhibit had any knowledge whatsoever of two Chaldees and a tree, right? That there is no reason to believe that. That is simply an extrapolation that you are making for no reason. The serpents who redescended, who taught and instructed, the fifth race. What sane man is capable of believing in our day that real serpents are hereby meant? Hence, the rough guess, now become almost an axiom with the men of science, that those who wrote in antiquity upon various sacred dragons and serpents either were superstitious and credulous people, or were bent upon deceiving those more ignorant than themselves. Yet, from Homer downward, the term implied something hidden from the profane. Terrible are the gods when they manifest themselves. These gods whom men call dragons. And again, I am referring, I believe that there is a fiery serpent in the sky that people see, and that is where they pull dragons from. And it even kills people. And Helena, treating in his De Natura Animalium of these Ophidian symbols, makes certain remarks which show that he understood well the nature of this most ancient of symbols. Thus, he most pertinently explains with regard to the above Homeric verse. For the dragon, while sacred and to be worshipped, has within himself something still more of the divine nature, of which it is better for others to remain in ignorance. This dragon, having a septenary meaning, the highest and lowest may be given. The former is identical with the self-born, the Logos, the Hindu Aja. He was the second person of the Trinity, the Son, with the Christian Gnostics called the Naasenians, or serpent worshippers. His symbol was the constellation of the dragon. Footnote. As shown by H. Lizaray in the Trinite Shretile de Voile, placed between the immutable Father, the pole, a fixed point, and mutable matter, the dragon transmits the latter the influences received by him from the pole, whence his name, the verbum. There is no reason to believe that either. Its 7 stars are the 7 stars held in the hand of the Alpha and Omega in Revelation. There is no reason to believe that. In most terrestrial meaning, the term dragon was applied to the wise men. Now, this is almost an understanding of Logos, right? But Logos, you have God, which is infinite, right? If you are putting any descriptor upon the Creator, you are limiting the Creator to the description, right? Turning the infinite into the finite. The infinite is God. The finite that he has turned into is the Spirit. The Spirit, when in motion, is Logos, right? Every instance of change, heat, motion, or life at all is the Logos. Any movement at all is the Spirit in action. Even in, like right now, all of this invisible around me is the Spirit in potential. I am the Spirit in actuality. I can change, I can move, I can do, right? You can see me, right? The cells are enacting change that allows you to see me. The light right here, that is also active plasma. That light, this light, all active plasma. That is the Spirit in motion, which is Logos. And so this is not quite an understanding of what Logos is, right? And if you are personifying the Logos, you're doing it wrong. If you were saying that the Logos was ever a person, you are doing it wrong. The Trinity is without, right? There is the God, there is the Spirit, and there is the Logos, which is a Trinity. There is the body, there is the soul, and there is the Spirit, which is a Trinity. That doesn't necessarily personify this, right? The God Trinity is different from the human Trinity. It's not putting a personification on it. We are a reflection of the divine. The divine is not necessarily a reflection of us. It is the source material. And so our Trinity is a reflection of that Trinity. All of the things, the matter, right, the decision, and just simply existing are all part of the Trinity. Does not have to be personified at all. There is no second person in the Trinity. It is the second aspect of the divine. Right? You have the potential of everything, you have the limiting to this specific thing, and then you have that specific thing in motion. Hopefully that's a little bit enlightening. All right. It's 7 stars of the... All right. This portion of the religious symbolism of antiquity is very abstruse and mysterious, and may remain incomprehensible to the profane. In our modern day, it so jars on the Christian ear that it can hardly escape, all civilization notwithstanding, being regarded as a direct denunciation of the most cherished Christian dogmas, the subject of which required, to do its justice, the pen and genius of Milton, whose poetical fiction has now taken root in the church as a revealed dogma. See the unconventional Bible study to completely undo all of that. Did the allegory of the dragon and his supposed conqueror in heaven originate with St. John in his revelation? No. Emphatically, we answer no. His dragon is Neptune, the symbol of Atlantean magic. That is an assumption. To demonstrate the negation, the reader is asked to examine the symbolism of the serpent or the dragon under its several aspects. The sidereal and cosmic glyphs. Every astronomer, besides occultists and astrologers, knows that, figuratively, the astral light, the Milky Way, and also the path of the sun to the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, as well as the circles of the sidereal or tropical year, were always called serpents in the allegorical and mystical phraseology of the adepts. Every astronomer, besides occultists and astrologers, so who's fucking left, right? Astrologers are the ones who are just, well, the astrologers are the ones that are applying significance to the movements of the heavens. Astronomers are just observing them. And so, where is the evidence? Not that I am an expert, but I have never before today heard of any astronomer at all talking about serpents in the sky, right? Other than the 2 constellations of, right? We have the dragon and we have Ophiuchus. Those are the only 2 even related to serpents. And most astronomers only use the zodiacal signs as reference points for the correct terminology, right? The degrees of ascent and declination and those things. And so I am completely unfamiliar with any scientific astronomer knowing this, right? Every astronomer knows that figuratively. The astral light was called serpent in the allegorical and mystical phraseology of the adepts. If they're astronomers and they're not occultists or astrologers, they're not adepts. How would they know that? There's a lot in that particular that just does not fit. This, cosmically as well as metaphorically. Poseidon is a dragon. Really. Gozar, called by the profane Neptune. The good and perfect serpent, the Messiah of the Nicene, whose symbol in heaven is Draco. But one ought to discriminate between the characters of this symbol. For instance, Zoroastrian esotericism is identical with that of the secret doctrine, and when, as an example, we read in the Vendidad, complaints uttered against the serpent, whose bites have transformed the beautiful eternal spring of Ariana Vago, changing it into winter, generating disease and death, and at the same time as mental and psychic consumption. Every occultist knows that the serpent alluded to is the North Pole, as also the pole of the heavens. Footnote, symbolized by the Egyptians under the form of a serpent with a hawk's head. I don't know I'm not as fully versed in this as I would like to be making definitive statements, right? So take it with a grain of salt. But again, I do not know that this is a true thing. Where is the technical reference at all, and by technical I do not necessarily mean scientific, to the North Pole being a serpent? I don't have any foundation for reference to that at all. Again, this is just something that is completely out of the blue, right? I don't claim to know everything, but I have a pretty firm grasp on most things. There are things that are beyond me. I don't claim to be perfect, right? I don't claim to be a full expert in anything, but I am at least learned in many things. And this is one of those things that would have caught my attention if I had caught the slightest reference to it whatsoever anywhere. And I haven't, ever. And so, yeah, it would be very interesting to see proof that this was actually a belief by anyone. The latter produces the seasons according to the angle at which it penetrates the center of the earth. The two axes were no more parallel, hence the eternal spring of Ariana Viego by the good river Daitaya had disappeared, and the Aryan Magi had to emigrate to Sagdiani, say the Esoteric accounts. But the esoteric teaching states that the pole had passed through the equator, and that the land of bliss of the fourth race, its inheritance from the third, had now become the region of desolation and woe. And once again, I am going to point out that I do believe that this was a thing, even if it is not correctly portrayed here. Right? The 12,000-year disaster cycle, once again, is a better explanation for many of the things which she is supposing about here. But I do believe that the pole passed through the equator. That is one of the parts of the 12,000-year disaster cycle. And I do believe that there was a different existence on the other side, right? There was probably, right, there's no reason to believe this other than a few accounts, but it is a possibility that on the other side of the flip last time, before it happened, the earth was in a different state, right? There is the record from the Bible that it had never rained. There are other references in other places about the waters being different then than they are now. There is a theory, and it is not necessarily a proven theory, but it does explain a couple of things, of this thing called the vapor canopy, which would be like living in a terrarium, right? If we were in a state of, I say this with a bitten tongue, right? Because if we had more humidity, and I live in Louisiana, which is the armpit of the West, and here during the summer, from mid-spring until mid-fall, we are generally speaking dealing with 90+% humidity. So it's not just humidity, it is a pressure thing too. But there was probably more of a canopy of clouds, but no free-flowing water from the sky. That can be hard for us to conceive of now, but if at a different point in time the Earth was actually a little bit bigger, see that Tiamat reference from earlier, then the isostatics would be different, right? It is entirely possible that there was all of this free-flowing moisture in the air without rainfall, and if that is true, and that is a big if, it would allow conditions that we would expect to see the giants develop in. Whether that is the giants of dinosaurs or the giant humanoids, we would expect to see in the vapor canopy situation larger growth. The plant life would be voracious, right? Massive trees, kind of like the sequoias that we have now. And along with that,
a massive flora and fauna, right, of all varieties. And so this, once again, is something that I do believe. But, again, it is purely speculation. There is no way to prove this, right? We have many scientific things that lead in that direction, but it is not incontrovertible proof. All right, back to the text. This alone ought to be incontrovertible proof of the great antiquity of the Zoroastrian scriptures. Why? That is not incontrovertible at all. It is something that somebody wrote. The Neo-Aryans of the post-Diluvian age could, of course, hardly recognize the mountains on the summits of which their forefathers had met before the flood and conversed with the pure Yazathas, celestial spirits of the elements, whose life and food they had once shared, as shown by Eckstein, Review Archaeology. The Venedad seems to point out a great change in the atmosphere of Central Asia, strong volcanic eruptions, and the collapse of a whole range of mountains in the neighborhood of the Karakorum chain. And again, this can be explained. Right? A great change in the atmosphere would be the vapor canopy leaving. And if the Tiamat situation did happen in the way that it is described, and if it is placed in this time period, whenever the Earth reformed, there would have been different pressures. Different pressures lead naturally into different condensation rates. Right? If you were unaware, there is a correlation between temperature and pressure and the state of matter. And so if the planet is bigger, pressure is going to be different. Water is going to act in a different manner. That doesn't mean that it's not water, but the ability to solidify is going to be different under different pressure. The ability to even condensate is going to be different under pressure. That is true for every single gas. Now, what the pressure differential is, that is up for speculation. It could have been volcanic eruptions. That is definitely in the speculation pot. But to say that it is definitive is not a good thing. The collapse of the whole range of mountains in the neighborhood of Karakorum, that can be explained as well. The 12,000-year disaster cycle, whenever the planet flips like they are describing here in this particular section. The way that the Earth moves, right, we spin in a counterclockwise motion, right? As we spin, the sphere that we are kind of squats. It forms an ovuloid shape. Some places are distorted by that squishing. When the flip happens and this ovoid turns like this, it's going to go like this, right? It's going to go from this, it's going to turn, and it's going to be like this for a minute, and then it's going to slowly expand like this. The centripetal force is going to change where the pressure points are in the continental plates. That is almost a guaranteed certainty if this happens. That would explain this, right? Whenever it changes and the water moves and it changes the plates, some of them are going to rise, some of them are going to sink, depending upon the water that is upon them, right? Places that used to be underwater are now going to not have water, and places that didn't have water is going to have water, and it's going to change the shape of the planet. That's going to make mountains rise and fall. And so this is something that is explainable. Now, all of that is still in the realm of speculation. Back to the text. The Egyptians, according to Eusebius, who for once, and for a wonder, wrote the truth. Of course, it agrees with you. It's got to be truth this time, right? Symbolized cosmos by a large fiery circle, representing a serpent with a hawk's head lying across its diameter. Here we have the pole of the earth within the plane of the ecliptic, attended with all the fiery consequences that must arise from such a state of the heavens, when the whole zodiac is 25,000 odd years, must have reddened with the solar blaze, and each sign must have been vertical to the polar region. See Mackey's Sphinxiad. I'm probably going to forget to look this up, so I'm going to pop this out real quick so that maybe I can remember later to look at that. I definitely want to see the evidence of this, right? must have been reddened with the solar blaze, and each side must have been vertical to the polar region. I would really like to see that evidence laid out because it leads into the 12,000 year disaster cycle, and my confirmation bias will eat that shit up. So, back to the text. Meru, the abode of the gods, was placed, as before explained, in the North Pole, while Patala, the nether region, was supposed to lie in the south. As each symbol in the esoteric philosophy has 7 keys, geographically, Meru and Patala have one significance and represent localities, while astronomically they have another and mean the 2 poles, which meanings ended by their being often rendered in exoteric sectarianism, the mountain and the pit, or heaven and hell. If we hold at present only the astronomical and geographical significance, it may be found that the ancients knew the topography and nature of the Arctic and Antarctic regions better than any of our modern astronomers. That again, 12,000 year disaster cycle. As the author just quoted half explains, Helion and Akerion meant nearly the same. Helion is the sun in the highest, Helios, Helion, on most high, and Acheron is 32 degrees above the pole and 32 below it. The allegorical river being thus supposed to touch the northern horizon in the latitude of 32 degrees. The vast concave that is forever hidden from our sight, which surrounded the southern pole, being therefore called the pit. I think we're finished that quote. While observing towards the northern pole that a certain circuit in the heavens always appeared above the horizon, they called it the mountain. As Meru is the highest abode of the gods, these were said to ascend and descend periodically, by which, astronomically, the zodiacal gods were meant, the passing of the original north pole of the earth to the south pole of the heaven. In that age, as the author of the curious work, the Sphinxiad, and of Urania's Keys to the Revelations, at noon, the ecliptic would be parallel with the meridian. The part of the zodiac would descend from the north pole to the north horizon, crossing the 8 coils of the serpent, 8 sidereal years, or over 200,000 solar years, which would seem like an imaginary ladder with 8 staves reaching from the earth up to the pole, i.e., the throne of Jove. Up this ladder, then, the gods, i.e., the signs of the zodiac, ascended and descended, Jacob's ladder and angels. It is more than 400,000 years since the zodiac formed the sides of the ladder. Now, if it is true that the earth does this rotation, here is something that is not going to be told in this for damn sure. If we change our orientation, and this is a big and, because it is most likely not true, the orientation of the sky changes, then that's going to be an issue, right? Now, the way that the actual mechanics are going to work, right? When the planet rotates and squashes, it's going to continue rotating in the counterclockwise manner. The crust is different than the core. The core is going to rotate in the manner that it is already rotating. The change is going to come on the crust. The crust can slip. If you were unaware, that is a thing, right? The continental plates drift. And so when this happens, what will probably happen is that we will get a reorientation. Now, where I am sitting right now, that is east, right? This is north, that is south, that is west. When we move 90 degrees, right, that is not going to be east anymore. It will either be north or south. But that orientation will change. The sun is going to rise over here now, and it will set over there instead of rising here and setting there. But it's still going to rise in the same relative location to the earth that it always was, right? That way. The only thing that is going to change is our perspective of where the sun rises on the planet. The sun is still going to make a continuous pass in the same way. The earth is not going to spin in the same way. It is going to spin a different way. well, it's making the same rotation, but it appears to be different. The zodiac should not move, right? That is in relation to the sun. Now, our observation of it will change, but our observation will make this east and that's west. That's not going to change the location of the stars. It's going to change our observation of them a little bit, but it's not going to make them move in a different manner. It will still be along the ecliptic. It's not going to be all of a sudden vertical where it was once horizontal. Our observation is just merely going to shift where it begins. It is still going to be the exact same constellations, just observed a little bit differently. And so, if the orientation is different, we will change what they are called maybe, but they're still going to be observing this way. It's got to do with where the sun is, right? Our sun signs are the zodiac. The moon signs are too, but that's a whole different calculation. The house of the zodiac is where the sun rises on that particular day. The sun's still going to be in the same spot. We are going to move in relative location of observation, and that is a completely different thing. And so this is not an explanation for Jacob's ladder. This is not an explanation for pretty much anything. And I know that that's going to come across a little bit harsh, but it is simply a true thing. If we turn, it's not the rotation of the earth that's going to turn. It's our observation of the rotation of the earth. Our reference points will change, but the actual observable exterior is going to remain exactly the same. Now, granted that it will be in different locations, right? So right now, if you are on the equator, you have this observation, right? You're not going to be on the equator anymore. You're going to have a different observation of the same stars. That feels like it was important to point out. This is an ingenious explanation, even if it not altogether free from occult heresy. Yet it is nearer the truth in many of a more scientific and especially theological character. As just said, the Christian Trinity was purely astronomical from its beginning, which made Rutilius say of those who humorized it, Judea Jones rediex stultorium. But the profane, and especially the Christian fanatics, ever in search of scientific corroboration on their dead-letter texts, will persist in seeing in the celestial pole the true serpent of Genesis, Satan, the enemy of mankind, instead of what it is, a cosmic metaphor. When the gods are said to forsake the earth, it does not only mean the gods, protectors and instructors, but also the minor gods, the regents of the zodiacal signs. Yet, the former, as existing and actual and existing entities which gave birth to, nursed, and instructed mankind in its early youth, appear in every scripture, in that of the Zoroastrians as much as in the Hindu Gospels. Ormazd, or Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Wisdom, is the synthesis of the Amshapins, or Amesha Sapinta, Immortal Benefactus, footnote. Also translated as Blissful Immortals by D.W. Geiger, but the first is more correct. The word, no, however, or the Logos, and its 6 highest aspects in Mazdaism. Again, this is a misunderstanding of what Logos is. These immortal benefactors are described in Zamyad Yasht as the Amisha Spintas, the shining, having officious eyes, great, helpful, imperishable, and pure, which are all 7 of like mind, like speech, all 7 doing alike, which are the creators and destroyers of the creatures of Ahura Mazda, their creators and overseers, their protectors and rulers. These few lines alone indicate the dual and even the triple character of the Amashapins, or Dayan Kohans, or the Serpents of Wisdom. They are identical with and yet separate from Ormazd, Ahura Mazda. They are also the angels of the stars of the Christians, the Stari Azatas of the Zoroastrians, or, again, the 7 planets, including the sun, of every religion. Footnote 2. These 7 become the 8 fundamental harmonics, the Ogdoad of the later materialized religions, the 7th or the highest principle, being no longer the pervading spirit, the synthesis, but becoming an anthropomorphic number or additional unit. That's not the right reason for why it's 8 now, but 8 is the number, not 7. The epithet, the shining, having efficacious eyes, proves it. Again, that does not prove anything. This on the physical and sidereal planes. On the spiritual, they are the divine powers of Ahura Mazda. But on the astral or psychic plane, again, they are the builders, the watchers, the Ptah fathers, and the first preceptors of mankind. When mortals shall have become sufficiently spiritualized, there will be no more need of forcing them into correct comprehension of ancient wisdom. Men will know then that there was never yet a great world reformer whose name is passed into our generation, who, A, was not a direct emanation of the Logos, under whatever name known to us. An example, an essential incarnation of one of the 7, of the divine spirit who is sevenfold, and B, who had not appeared before during the past cycles. They will recognize, then, the cause which produces in history and chronology certain riddles of the ages, the reason why, for instance, it is impossible for them to assign any reliable date to Zoroaster, who is found multiplied by 12 and 14 in the Dabistan. Why the Rishis and Manus are so mixed up in their numbers and individualities, why Krishna and Buddha speak of themselves as reincarnations. An example, Krishna is identified with the Rishi Narayana, and Gautama gives a series of his previous births. And why the former, especially, being the very supreme Brahma, is yet called Amsamvantara, a part of a part, only of the supreme on earth. Finally, why Osiris is a great god and at the same time a prince on earth, who reappears as Teote Hermes, and why Yeshua, in Hebrew Yeshua, of Nazareth is recognized Kabbalistically in Yeshua, the son of Nun, as well as in other personages. The Esoteric doctrine explains it by saying that each of these, and many others, had first appeared on earth as one of the 7 powers of the Logos. Again, incorrect. Individualized as a god or angel, incorrect. Then mixed with matter. They had reappeared in turn as great sages and instructors who taught the 5th race after having instructed the 2 preceding races, had ruled during the divine dynasties, and had finally sacrificed themselves to be reborn under various circumstances for the good of mankind and for his salvation at certain critical periods, until, in their last incarnations, they had become truly only the pots of a pot on earth, though de facto the one supreme in nature. This is the metaphysics of theogony, and as every power among the 7 has, once individualized, in his charge one of the elements of creation and rules over it. Footnote. These elements are the cosmic, the terrene, the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, the aqueous, and finally the human, and their physical, spiritual, and psychic aspects. I do not agree with that. And rules over it, hence the many meanings in every symbol, which, unless interpreted according to the esoteric methods, generally lead to inextricable confusion. Does the Western Kabbalist, generally an opponent of Eastern occultists, require a proof? Let him open Eliphas Levi's History de la Magic, page 53, and carefully examine his Grand Symbol Kabbalistique of the Zohar. He will find, on the engraving given, a white man standing erect and a black woman upside down. An example standing on her head, her legs passing under the extended arms of the male figure and protruding behind his shoulders, while their hands join at an angle on each side. You want to know why? I can give you the why. That's Yakim and Boaz, right? That is a anthropomorphized energy flow, right? You have the white, penetrative, masculine energy that comes from the top, right? It is penetrative, it is generative, and then you have the black, absorptive, nurturative, feminine energy from the bottom, right? The one coming down this way, the one coming up this way. That explains this particular illustration very well. Eliphas Levi makes of it God in nature, and of course, he is wrong. Or God, light, mirrored inversely in nature and matter, darkness. Kabbalistically and symbolically, he is right. I just gave you a better explanation. You don't have to take it, but it is a better explanation. But only so far as emblematical cosmogony goes. Nor has he invented the symbol any more than the Kabbalists have. The two figures in white and black stone have existed in the temples of Egypt from time immemorial, agreeably to tradition, and historically, ever since the day of King Cambyses, who personally saw them. Therefore, the symbol must have been in existence since nearly 2,500 years ago. This, at the very least, for that Persian sovereign, who was a son of Cyrus the Great, succeeded his father in the year 529 BC. These figures were the two Kabiri, personifying the opposite poles. That is closer to what I just said. Herodotus, Thalia, number 77, tells posterity that when Cambyses entered the temple of the Kabirim, he went into an indistinguishable fit of laughter, on perceiving what he thought a man erect and a woman standing at the top of her head before him. These were the poles, however, whose symbol was intended to commemorate the passing of the original North Pole of the earth to the South Pole of the heaven, as perceived by Mackey. Footnote, who adds that the Egyptians had various ways of representing the angles of the poles. Also in Perry's View of the Levant, there is a figure representing the south pole of the earth in the constellation of the Hop, in which the poles appear like two straight rods surmounted with hawks' wings, but they were also often represented as serpents with heads of hawks, one on each end. It could be that it was the North and South Pole. Probably not, right? My explanation, I'm going to stick to it, even though it is speculation, simply because I know I cannot relay to you the factual truth of the situation other than relaying it, right? This is an experiential thing. But this is one of those things that has been revealed to me. I use these two forces. I am fully aware and, if not a master of their use, definitely on the adept side of that. And so when I tell you that I am 99.9% certain that this symbol is talking about these two powers, take it as you want. But they represented the poles inverted in consequence of the great inclination of the axis, bringing each time as a result the displacement of the oceans and submersion of the polar lands, and the consequent upheaval of the new continents in the equatorial regions, and vice versa. These Kabirim were the deluge gods. Now this is entirely possible, right? Once again, I do believe in the deluge. I do believe in the cycle of destruction. I do believe that it is going to change the axis of the planet. I do believe that there will be different observations. And so that is possible, right? This second part of that. But it does not necessarily mean that the white and the black mean the poles. It is possible, but these two things do not necessarily correlate. right? If you were saying that it was the original North Pole and the South Pole, that is your guess. To say that they represented the poles inverted is a different guess. And then there is no doubt whatsoever that the Egyptians did record the skies. I do have some doubt that they recorded this change, simply because, once again, that is one of the things that I would definitely be interested in, and any whisper of it would send me down the rabbit hole. 12,000 year disaster cycle. And so it is entirely possible that this is true. It is entirely possible that it is not, and is not one of the things that I can be firm upon. I can tell you that for me, the Masons and their Boaz and Yakim is representing this thing that I just told you. And most likely, in this symbology, it means the same thing because the Masons stole from the Kabbalists. Back to the text. This may help us to get at the key of the seemingly hopeless confusion among the numbers of names and titles given to the one and the same gods and classes of gods. Faber showed already at the beginning of this century the identity of the Corybantes, Cuartes, the Dioscuri, Anactes, de Magni, Adili Dactyli, Lares Penates Manes. Footnote 2. Faber and Bishop Cumberland would make them all the later pagan personifications, as the former writer has it, of the Noetic ark, and no other than the patriarch, Noah and his family. See his Kabiri, Volume 1, 136, because we are told, after the deluge, in commemoration of the event, the pious Noachide had established a religious festival, which was later on corrupted by their impious descendants, demons or hero gods, and at length unblushing obscenity usurped the name and garb of religion. Now, this is indeed putting an extinguisher upon the human reasoning powers, not only of antiquity, but even of our present generations. Reverse the statement and explain after the words, Noah and his family, that what is meant by the patriarch and his family is simply the Jewish version of the Samothracian mystery of Saturn or Kronos Sadiq and his sons, and then we may say amen. Penates, Manes, Titans, and Alate with the Kabiri. And we have shown that the latter were the same as the Manus, the Rishis, and Ardayan Kohans, who incarnated in the elect of the third and fourth races. You have said it, you have not shown it. Thus, while in theogony the Kabiri Titans were the seven great gods, cosmically and astronomically, the Titans were called Atlantes, because, perhaps, as Faber says, they were connected with At-Alas, the divine sun, and with Tit, the deluge. But this, if true, is only the exoteric version. Esoterically, the meaning of their symbols depends upon the appellation, or title, used. The seven mysterious, all-inspiring great gods, the Dioscuri, footnote, who became later on, with the Greeks, limited only to Castor and Pollux, but in the days of Lemuria, the Dioscuri, the Egg-born, were the seven dying Kohans, Agnishwata Kumara, who incarnated in the seven elect of the third race. And again, we do not have records of Lemuria. Where was it? Right there. All right. The Dioscuri, the deities surrounded with the darkness of occult nature, became the Idei, or Idaic finger, with the adept healer by metals. The true etymology of the name Lares, now signifying ghost, must be sought in the Etruscan word Lars, conductor, leader. Sankaniathon translates the word Alate as fire worshippers, and Tabor believes it is derived from Al-Orit, the god of fire. Both are right, as in both cases it is a reference to the sun, the highest god, towards whom the planetary gods gravitate, astronomically and allegorically, and whom they worship. As Lares, they are truly the solar deities, though Faber's etymology, who say that Lar is a contradiction of Elar, the solar deity, is not very correct. they are the Lares, the conductors, the leaders of men. As Aleti, they were the 7 planets, astronomically, and as Lares, the regents of the same, are protectors and rulers, mystically. For purposes of exoteric or phallic worship, as also cosmically, they were the Kabiri, their attributes being recognized in these 2 capacities by the name of the temples to which they respectively belonged and those of their priests. They all belonged, however, to the septenary, creative, and informing groups of dying Kohans. The Sabaeans, who worship the regents of the 7 planets as the Hindus do their rishis, held Seth and his son Hermes, Enoch or Enos, as the highest among the planetary gods. Seth and Enos were barred from the Sabaeans and then disfigured by the Jews exoterically. But the truth can still be traced about them, even in Genesis. Footnote 2. Clement of Alexandria recognized the astronomical significance of chapter 25 at sequence of Exodus. According to the Mosaic doctrine, he says that the 7 planets help in the generation of terrestrial things. The 2 cherubs standing on the 2 sides of the sacred tetragrammaton represent Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. That is a speculation. Seth is the progenitor of those early men of the 3rd race in whom the planetary angels had incarnated, a dying Kohan himself, who belonged to the informing gods, and Enos, Hanok or Enoch, or Hermes, was said to be his son, because it was a generic name for all the early seers, Enochion. Thence the worship. The Arabic writer Suyuti says that the earliest records mention Seth, or Set, as the founder of Sabianism, and therefore that the pyramids which embody the planetary system were regarded as the place of sepulchre of both Seth and Idris, Hermes or Enoch. See Vice Operations. That thither Sabaeans proceeded on pilgrimage and chanted prayers 7 times a day, turning to the north, the Mount Meru, Kaf, Olympus. Abd al-Latif says curious things about the Sabaeans in their books. So does Eden Ahmed bin Yahya, who wrote 200 years later, while the latter maintains that each pyramid was consecrated to a star regent rather. Abd al-Latif assures us that he had read in the Sabaean books that one pyramid was the tomb of Agathodemon and the other of Hermes. Agathodemon was no one other than Seth, and according to some writers, Hermes was his son, adds Mr. Stanland Wake in The Great Pyramid. Thus, while in Samothrace and the oldest Egyptian temples they were the great cosmic gods, these 7 and the 49 sacred fires, in the Grecian fanes their rites became mostly phallic, therefore, to the profane, obscene. In the latter case they were 3 or 4 or 7, the male and female principles, the crux ansata. This division showing why some classical writers held that they were only 3, while others named 4, and these were the Kabiri, Axieros, in his female aspect, Demeter, Axiokerasa, Persephone. Footnote. It is a curious idea, yet one not very far from the truth, perhaps, that speculation of Mackey, the self-made adept of Norwich, found in his mythological astronomy. He says that the Kabiri named Axieros and Axiokerasa derive their names, A, from Kab or Cab, a measure, and from Urim, the heavens, and Kabirim being thus a measure of the heavens, and B, that their distinctive names, implying the principle of generation, referred to the sexes. 4. The word sex was formerly understood by Aix, which is now settled into sex. He refers to Encyclopedia Londinius at the word aspiration. Now, if we give the aspirated sounds to Axirios, it would be Saxirios, and the other pole would be Saxiokerasa. The 2 poles would thus become the generators of the other powers of nature. They would be the parents, therefore the most powerful gods. Axioketersos, Pluto or Hades, and Cadmos or Cadmilos, Hermes, not the ithyphallic Hermes mentioned by Herodotus, but he of the sacred legend, explained only during the Samothracian mysteries. This identification, due, according to the scholiast Apollyon, to an indiscretion of Menesius, is none at all, as names alone do not reveal much. There were still others again who maintained, being as right in their way, that there were only two Kabiri. These were, esoterically, the two Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, and exoterically, Jupiter and Bacchus. The two personified the terrestrial poles, geodesically, the terrestrial and the pole of the heavens, astronomically, as the physical and spiritual man. The story of Semele and Jupiter and the birth of Bacchus, the Bamatur, with all the circumstances attending it, needs only to be read esoterically to understand the allegory. The parts played in the event by fire, water, earth, etc., in the many versions, will show how the father of the gods and the merry god of the wine were also made to personify the two terrestrial poles. The telluric, metalline, magnetic, electric, and fiery elements are also many allusions and references to the cosmic and astronomical character of the Diluvian tragedy. In astronomy, the poles are indeed the heavenly measure, vide nunc sopra, and so are the Kabiri Dioscuri, as will be shown, and the Kabiri Titans, to whom Diodorus ascribes the invention of fire. Footnote. The word Guebra comes from Kabiri, and means Persian ancient fire worshippers or Parsis. Kabiri became Gabiri, and then remained as an appellation of the Zoroastrians in Persia. Ascribes the invention of fire and the art of manufacturing iron. Moreover, Pausanias shows that the original Kabiric deity was Prometheus. But the fact that, astronomically, the Titans, Kabirim, were also the generators and regulators of the seasons, and cosmically, the great volcanic energies, the gods presiding over all the metals and terrestrial works, does not prevent them from being, in their original divine characters, the beneficent entities who, symbolized in Prometheus, brought light to the world, and endowed humanity with intellect and reason. They are preeminently in every theogony, especially in the Hindu, the sacred divine fires, 3, 7, or 49, according as the allegory demands it. Their very names prove it, as they are the Agni Putra, sons of the fire in India, and the genii of the fire under numerous names in Greece and elsewhere. Welker, Mori, and now Dekarm show the name Kabirian, meaning the powerful through fire, from the Greek word kaio, to burn, the Semitic Kabirim, the powerful, the mighty, and the great, answering to the Greek megaloi, donatoi, or later epithets. They were universally worshipped, and their origin is lost in the night of time. Yet, whether propitiated in Phrygia, Phoenicia, the Throde, Thrace, Egypt, Lemnos, or Sicily, their cult was always connected with fire, their temples ever built in the most volcanic localities, and in exoteric worship they belonged to the Chthonian divinities. Therefore, Christianity has made of them infernal gods. They are truly the great, beneficent, and powerful gods, as Cassius Hermon calls them. At Thebes, Kor and Demeter, the Kabirim, had a sanctuary, and in Memphis, the Kabiri had a temple so sacred that none, excepting the priests, were suffered to enter their holy precincts. Herodotus 1. But we must not lose sight at the same time of the fact that the title of Kabiri was a generic one, that the Kabiri, the mighty gods as well as mortals, were of both sexes, as also terrestrial, celestial, and cosmic. That, while in their later capacity as rulers of the sidereal and terrestrial powers, a purely geological phenomenon, as it is now regarded, was symbolized in the persons of those rulers. They were also, in the beginnings of times, the rulers of mankind. When incarnated as kings of the divine dynasties, they gave the first impulse to civilizations and directed the mind with which they had endured men to the invention and perfection of all the arts and sciences. Thus are the Kabiri are said to have appeared as the benefactors of men, and, as such, they live for ages in the memories of nations. To them, the Kabiri, or Titans, is ascribed the invention of letters, the Devanagari, or the alphabet and language of the gods, of laws and legislature, of architecture, as of the various modes of magic, so-called, and of the medical use of plants. Hermes, Orpheus, Cadmus, Asclepius, all those demigods and heroes, of whom is ascribed the revelation of sciences to men, and in whom Bryant, Faber, Bishop Cumberland, and so many other Christian writers, too zealous for plain truth, would force posterity to see as only pagan copies of one and sole prototype, named Noah, are all generic names. It is the Kabiri who are credited with having revealed, by producing corn or wheat, the great boon of agriculture. What Isis Osiris, the one living Kabiri, has done in Egypt, that Ceres is said to have done in Sicily. They all belong to one class. That the serpents were ever the emblems of wisdom and prudence is again shown by the caduceus of Mercury. One with Deote, the god of wisdom, with Hermes, and so on. The two serpents, entwined around the rod, are phallic symbols of Jupiter and other gods who transform themselves into snakes for purposes of seducing goddesses, but only in the unclean fancies of profane symbologists. The serpent has ever been the symbol of the adept and of his powers of immortality and divine knowledge. Mercury is a psychopompic character, conducting and guiding with the caduceus the souls of the dead to Hades, and even raising the dead to life with it. It is simply a very transparent allegory. It shows the dual power of the secret wisdom, the black and the white magic. It shows this personified wisdom guiding the soul after death, and its power to call to life that which is dead. A very deep metaphor if one thinks over its meaning. And that is the exact same meaning that I ascribed to the Kabbalistic symbology earlier. Every people of antiquity reverenced this symbol, with the exception of Christians, who chose to forget the brazen serpent of Moses, and even the implied acknowledgement of the great wisdom and prudence of the serpent by Jesus himself. Be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves. The Chinese, one of the oldest nations of our fifth race, made of it the emblem of their emperors, who are thus the degenerate successors of the serpents, or initiates, who rule the early races of fifth humanity. The emperor's throne is the dragon's seat, and his dresses of state are embroidered with the likeness of the dragon. The aphorisms in the oldest books of China, moreover, say plainly that the dragon is a human, albeit divine, being. Speaking of the yellow dragon, the chief of the others, the Tuan Ying Tu, says, "His wisdom and virtue are unfathomable. He did not go beyond in company and does not live in herds. He is an ascetic. He wanders in the wilds beyond the heavens. He goes and comes, fulfilling the decree, karma, at the proper seasons. If there is perfection, he comes forth. If not, he remains invisible. As Kan Fu Chu is made to say by Lu Lan, the dragon feeds in the pure water of wisdom and sports in the clear waters of life." I'm going to check this real quick because I want to say, okay, no. I thought that this was the beginning of the next section. Sometimes they run into each other. Our divine instructors. Now, Atlantis and the Phlegian Isle are not the only record that is left of the deluge. China has also her tradition and the story of an island or continent which it calls Maligai Sima, and which came for in favor spell Morigosimia, for some mysterious phonetic reasons of their own. Kaempfer, in his Japan, gives the tradition. The island, owing to the iniquity of the giants, sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and Periun, the king, the Chinese Noah, escapes along with his family, owing to a warning of the gods through two idols. It is that pious prince and his descendants who have peopled China. The Chinese traditions speak of the divine dynasties of kings as much as those of any other nations. At the same time, there is not an old fragment, but shows the relief of a multiform and even multigeneric evolution, spiritual, psychic, intellectual, and physical, of human beings, just as given in the present work. A few of these claims have now to be considered. Our races, they all show, have sprung from divine races, by whatever name they are called. Whether we deal with the Indian rishis or Pitris, with the Chinese Ximlang and Chang'e, their divine man and demigods, with the Akkadian Dingir and Molil, the creative god and the god of the ghost world, with the Egyptian Isis Osiris and Teoti, with the Hebrew Elohim, or again with the Manco Capac and his Peruvian progeny. The story varies everywhere. Every nation has Amshapins. The footnote: the Ashampens are 6, if Ormazd, their chief and Logos, is excluded. But in the secret doctrine, he is the 7th and the highest, just as Ptah is the 7th Kabir among the Kabiri. Every nation has Amshapins, 6 exoterically, 10 and 7 Chaldean antidotes, 10 and 7 Sephiroth, etc., etc. One and all have been derived from the primitive Dayan Kohans of the esoteric doctrine, or the builders of the stanzas. From Anu, Teote Hermes, Oannes Dagon, and Edris Enoch, down to Plato and Pandorus, all tell us of 7 divine dynasties, of 7 Lemurian and 7 Atlantean divisions of the earth. That is not true. There is a record of Atlantis that comes down from Plato. We have read it. It is Timaeus. I think it's Timaeus. It might be Critias. I get those two confused. They are dealing pretty close to the same subject matter. That is the only existent actual record of Atlantis. There is 0 references to Lemuria. 0. Now, she is calling Lemuria this primitive continent, which I do believe existed, but it was not named Lemuria. It is not clearly stated in anything that this was a thing. We have one record of Atlantis, and it talks about the 10 divisions on Atlantis, but I'm pretty sure it does not mention 7 divisions of the earth, right? That is knocking this out of an authority position. The 7 Lemurian is not a thing. The 7 Atlantean is, again, not a thing. And that's not to say that it's, maybe I forgot, right? Maybe that part wasn't as important to me, so it didn't stick in the old noggin. But I'm fairly familiar with the story, and I'm pretty sure that that's not included, right? There were 10 kingdoms in Atlantis, not 7. So, of the 7 primitive and dual gods who descend from their celestial abode, footnote: in the Purana, it is identified with Vishnu and Brahma's Saveta Dvipa of Mount Maru. From their celestial abode and reign on earth, teaching mankind astronomy, architecture, and all the other sciences that have come down to us. These beings appear first as gods and creators. Then they merge in nascent man to finally emerge as divine rulers and kings. But this fact has been gradually forgotten. As Bossuet shows, the Egyptians themselves confess that science flourished in their country only since Isis Osiris, whom they continue to adore as gods, though they had become princes in human form. And he adds of Osiris Isis, the divine androgyne, it is said that this prince, Isis Osiris, built cities in Egypt, stopped the overflowing of the Nile, invented agriculture, the use of the vine, music, astronomy, and geometry. When Abdul Fattah says in his Historia Antisalamatia that the Sabaean language was established by Seth and Edris, Enoch, he means by Sabaean language astronomy. Okay, in the Melo, I don't know enough to dispute that, but it does not seem like a logical conclusion to make. In the Melelawa Nohil, Hermes is called the disciple of Agathodemon, and in another account, Agathodemon is mentioned as a king of Egypt. Sorry. Selepus Geraldinius gives curious traditions about Enoch. He calls him the divine giant. In the Book of the Various Names of the Nile, the same author, the historian Ahmed ben Yosef el-Tifus, tells us of the belief among the Semitic Arabs that Seth, become later the Egyptian Typhon, Set, had been one of the 7 angels or patriarchs in the Bible. Then he became immortal and Adam's son, after which he communicated the gift of prophecy and astronomical science to Jared, who passed it to his son Enoch. But Enoch, Idris, the author of 30 books, was Sabaean by origin. Are you trying to say that Enoch wrote 30 books? Because that is a lie. An example belonging to the Saba, a host. Having established the rites and ceremonies of primitive worship, he went to the east, where he constructed 140 cities, of which Edessa was the least important, then returned to Egypt where he became its king. Thus he is identified with Hermes, but there were 5 Hermes, or rather 1, who appeared, as some Manus and Rishis did, in several different characters. In the Burhamikati, he is mentioned as Hormig, a name of the planet Mercury, or Buddha, and Wednesday was sacred both to Hermes and Teote. The Hermes of Oriental tradition worshipped in Phoenicia and said to have fled after the death of Argus into Egypt, civilized it under the name of Teote. But under whichever of these characters, he is always credited with having transferred all the sciences from latent to active potency. An example, with having been the first to teach magic to Egypt and to Greece, before the days of Magna Graecia, and when the Greeks were not even Hellenes. Not only Herodotus, the father of history, tells us of the marvelous dynasties of gods that preceded the reigns of mortals, followed by the dynasties of demigods, heroes, and finally men, but the whole series of classics support him. Diodorus, Aristophanes, Plato, Manetho, etc., repeat the same and never vary in the order given. It is indeed, as Cruiser shows, from the spheres of the stars wherein dwell the gods of light and wisdom descends to the inferior spheres. In the system of the ancient priests, hierophants and adepts, all things without exceptions, gods, the genii, manes, souls, the whole world, are conjointly developed in space and duration. The pyramid may be considered as a symbol of this magnificent hierarchy of spirits. That is an assumption. Footnote. It's just a reference to Egypt. There were more efforts made by the modern historians, French academicians, like Renan chiefly, to suppress truth by ignoring the ancient annals of divine kings than is strictly consistent with honesty. But M. Renan could never be more unwilling than was Aristophanes, 260 years B.C., to accept the unpalatable fact, and yet the latter found himself obliged to recognize its truth. For this, the great astronomer is treated with great contempt by his colleagues 2,000 years later. Manetho became with them a superstitious priest, born and bred in the atmosphere of other lying priest of Heliopolis, Frere. All those historians and priests, justly remarks the demonologist de Merville, so voracious and when repeating stories of human kings and men, suddenly become extremely suspicious no sooner do they go back to their gods. But there is a synchronistic table of Abydos, which, thanks to the genius of Champollion, has now vindicated the good faith of the priest of Egypt, Manethos above all, and that of Ptolemy. In the Turin Papyrus, the most remarkable of all, in the words of the Egyptologist de Rouge. Champollion, struck with amazement, found that he had under his own eyes the whole truth. It was the remains of a list of dynasties embracing the furthest mythic times, or the reign of the gods and heroes. At the very outset of this curious papyrus, we have to arrive at the conviction that so far back already as the period of Ramses, those mythic and heroical traditions were just as Manetho had transmitted them to us. We see figuring in them, as kings of Egypt, the gods Seb, Osiris, Horus, Teote Hermes, and the goddess Ma, a long period of centuries being assigned to the reign of each of these. The synchronistic tables of Manetho, besides the fact that they were disfigured by Eusebius for dishonest purposes, have never gone beyond Manetho. The chronology of the divine kings and dynasties, like that of the age of humanity, has ever been in the hands of priests and was kept secret from the profane multitudes. Africa, as a continent, it is said, appeared before Europe did. Nevertheless, it appeared later than Lemuria, and even the earliest Atlantis, that the whole region of what is now Egypt in the deserts was once upon a time covered with the sea, was known firstly through Herodotus, Strabo, Pliny, and all the Greeks, and secondly through geology. Abyssinia was once upon a time an island, and the Delta was the first country occupied by the pioneer immigrants who came with their gods from the northeast. When was it? History is silent upon the subject. Fortunately, we have the Dendera zodiac, the planisphere on the ceiling of one of the oldest Egyptian temples, which records the fact. This zodiac, with its mysterious 3 Virgos between the Lion and Libra, had found its Oedipus, who understood the riddle of these signs and justified the truthfulness of those priests who told Herodotus that A. the poles of the earth and the ecliptic had formerly coincided, and B. that even since their first zodiacal records were commenced, the poles have been 3 times within the plane of the ecliptic, as the initiates taught. Bailey had not sufficient words at his command to express his surprise at the sameness of all such traditions about the divine races. "What are finally," he exclaims, "all those reigns of the Indian Devas and Persian Peris, or those reigns and dynasties of the Chinese legends, those Tian Huang, or the kings of heaven, quite distinct from the Ti Huang, the kings on earth, and the Yin Huang, the king's men, a distinction which is in perfect accord with that one other made by the Greeks and the Egyptians in enumerating their dynasties of gods, of demigods, and of mortals." Footnote. History de Astronomie Ancienne. "Now," says Panodorus, "it is before that time, Menes, that the reign of the 7 gods who rule the world took place. It was during that period that those benefactors of humanity descended on earth and taught men to calculate the course of the sun and moon by the 12 signs of the ecliptic. Nearly 500 years before the actual era, Herodotus was shown by the priests of Egypt the statues of their human kings and pontiffs, Paromis, the archi-prophets or Maya Kohans of the temples, born one from the other, without the intervention of woman, who had reigned before Menes, their first human king. These statues, he said, were enormous colossi in wood, 345 in number, each of which had his name, his history, and his annals. They assured Herodotus, footnote, See also Memories the Academy. Unless the most truthful of historians, the father of history, is now accused of fibbing, just in this instance, that no historian could ever understand or write an account of these superhuman kings, unless he had studied and learned the history of the three dynasties that preceded the human, namely, the dynasties of the gods, that of the demigods, and of the heroes or giants. These three dynasties are the three races. Footnote 2. In Vishnu Purana Book 2, Chapter 3, 4, may be found many corroborations of the same if one reads carefully. The reign of the gods, lower gods, and men are all enumerated in the descriptions of the 7 islands, 7 seas, 7 mountains, etc., ruled by kings. Each king is said invariably to have 7 sons, an allusion to the 7 sub-races. One instance will do. The king of Kusadwipa had 7 sons, follow names, after whom the 7 portions, Varsha, of the island were called. There reside mankind, along with Daitas and Danavas, as well as with spirits of heaven, Gandharvas, Yakshas, Kampurushas, etc., and gods. There is but one exception in the case of Priyavrata, the son of the first Manu, Swayambhuva, who had 10 sons. But of these, 3, Medha, Agnibahu, and Putra, became ascetics and refused their portions. Thus, Priyavrata divided the earth again into 7 continents. Translated into the language of the esoteric doctrine, these 3 dynasties would also be those of the Devas, the Kimpurushas, and of the Navas and Dayatas, otherwise gods, celestial spirits, and giants or titans. Happy are those who are born, even from the condition of gods, as men, in Bharata Varsha, exclaim the incarnated gods themselves during the 3rd rude race. Bharata is India, but in this case it symbolized the chosen land in those days and was considered the best of the divisions of Jambudvipa, as it was the land of active, spiritual works par excellence, the land of initiation and of divine knowledge. Can one fail to recognize in Cruiser great powers of intuition when, being almost unacquainted with the Aryan Hindu philosophies, little known in his day, he wrote, "We modern Europeans feel surprised when hearing talk of the spirits of the sun, moon, etc., but we repeat again the natural good sense and the upright judgment of the ancient peoples, quite foreign to our entirely material ideas upon celestial mechanics and physical sciences. Could not see in the stars and planets only that which we see, namely, simple masses of light or opaque bodies moving in circuits inside real space, merely according to the laws of attraction or repulsion. But they saw in them living bodies, animated by spirits, as they saw the same in every kingdom of nature. This doctrine of spirits, so consistent and conformable to nature, from which it was derived, formed a grand and unique conception, wherein the physical, the moral, and the political aspects were all blended together. It is such a conception only that can lead man to form a correct conclusion about his origin and the genesis of everything in the universe, of heaven and earth, between which he is a living link. Without such a psychological link and the feeling of its presence, no science can ever progress, and the realm of knowledge must be limited to the analysis of physical matter only. Occultists believe in spirits because they feel, and some see, themselves surrounded on every side by them. Footnote 1. As a general rule, now that the very nature of the inner man has become as blind as his physical nature, man is situated on this globe as the Amphioxus is in the ocean, surrounded by shoals and millions of various other fishes and creatures that see it. The Amphioxus species, having neither brain nor any of these senses possessed by the other classes, see them not. Who knows whether on the Darwinian theories these branchiostoma are not the direct ancestors of our materialists? I'm not sure what this is. Let's pop it out real quick, just because. Amphioxus the lancelets, fish-like benefic filter-breathing chordates. Okay. Back to the text. Materialists do not. They live on this earth just as in the world of insects and even of fishes. Some creatures live surrounded by myriads of their own genus without seeing or so much as sensing them. Footnote 2. The occultists have been accused of worshiping gods or devils. We deny this. Among the numberless host of spirits, men that were, and those who will be men, there are those immeasurably superior to the human race, higher and holier than the highest saint on earth, and wiser than any mortal without exception. And there are those, again, who are no better than we are, and some are far worse and inferior to the lowest savage. It is the latter classes that command the readiest communication with our earth, who perceive and sense us, as the clairvoyants perceive and sense them. The close proximity of our respective abodes and planes of perception are in favor of such intercommunication, unfortunately, as they are ever ready to interfere with our affairs for weal or woe. If we are asked how it is that none but sensitive hysterical natures, neuro and psychopathic persons, see and occasionally talk with spirits, we answer the question by several other queries. We ask, do you know the nature of hallucination, and can you define its psychic process? How can you tell that all such visions are due merely to physical hallucinations? What makes you feel so sure that mental and nervous diseases, while drawing a veil over our normal senses, so-called, do not reveal at the same time vistas unknown to healthy man by throwing open doors usually closed against your scientific perceptions? Or that a psychospiritual faculty does not forthwith replace the loss or the temporary atrophy of a purely physical sense? Is it disease or the exuberance of nervous fluid which produces mediumship and visions, hallucinations as you call them? But what does science know even of mediumship? Truly, were the modern Carcots to pay attention to the delirium of their patients from a more psychic standpoint, science, and physiology especially, might be more benefited than they are now, and truth have a wider field of fact in its knowledge. Plato is the first sage among the classics who speaks at length of the divine dynasties, and locates them on a vast continent which he calls Atlantis. Well, finally we get it called a continent. Bailey was not the first nor last to believe in the same, and he had been preceded and anticipated in his theory by Father Kircher. The learned Jesuit writes in Apetius Egypticus, I confess, for a long time I had recorded all this, dynasties and the Atlantis, as pure fables, to the day when, better instructed in Oriental languages, I judged that all of those legends must be, after all, only the development of a great truth. As de Rougemont shows, Theopompus, in his Meropis, made the priest of Phrygia and Asia Minor speak exactly as the priest of Sais did when revealed to Solon the history and fate of Atlantis. According to Theopompus, it was a unique continent of an indefinite size and containing 2 countries inhabited by 2 races. A fighting warrior race and a pious meditative race. Footnote. These were the early Aryans and the bulk of the 4th root races, the former pious and meditative yoga contemplation, the latter a fighting race of sorcerers who were rapidly degenerating owing to their uncontrolled passions. You will note that I just pulled that out because I am definitely going to look at that. Right, I am unfamiliar with this account entirely, and so I am definitely going to check it out. A pious meditative race, which Theopompus symbolized by 2 cities. Footnote 2. The northern and southern divisions of Lemuria, Atlantis, the Hyperborean and the equatorial lands of the 2 continents. See sections about Lemuria and Atlantis in history. The pious city was continually visited by the gods. The belligerent city was inhabited by various beings, invulnerable to iron, liable to be mortally wounded only by stone and wood. Footnote 3. This is a cult and refers to the property of iron, which, attracted by magnetic elements, is repelled by others, which are made, by an occult process, as impervious to it as water to a blow. De Rougemont treats this as pure fiction of Theopompus, and even sees as a fraud in the assertion of the Sciatic priests. This was denounced by the demonologists as illogical, in the words of de Merville. A supercherie which was based on a belief, the product of faith of the whole antiquity, a supposition which yet gave its name to a whole mountain chain, the Atlas, which specified within the greatest precision a topographical region, by placing some of its lands at a small distance from Cadiz and the Strait of Calpetus, which prophesied, 2,000 years before Columbus, the great transoceanic land situated beyond that Atlantis, which is reached, it is said, by the islands not of the blessed but of the good spirits. Such a supposition can never be a universal chimera. It is certain that, whether chimera or reality, the priest of the whole world had it from the one and the same source. The universal tradition about the third great continent, which perished some 850,000 years ago. Again, this number is completely made up. Footnote. The first continent or island, if so preferred, the cap of the North Pole, has never perished, nor will it to the end of the seven races. A continent inhabited by two distinct races, distinct physically and especially morally, both deeply versed in primeval wisdom and secrets of nature, mutually antagonistic in their struggle, during the course and progress of their double evolution. Whence, even the Chinese teachings upon the subject, if it is but a fiction, have they not recorded the existence, once upon a time, of a holy island beyond the sun, the Chao, and beyond which were situated the lands of the immortal men? Do they not still believe that the remnants of the immortal men, who survived when the holy island became black with sin and perished, have found refuge in the great desert of Gobi, where they still reside invisible to all and defended from approach by hosts of spirits? If one has to lend ear to traditions, writes every unbelieving Boulanger, the latter place, before the reign of kings, that of the heroes and demigods, and still earlier and beyond they place the marvelous reign of the gods and all the fables of the Golden Age. One feels surprised that annals so interesting should have been rejected by almost all our historians, and yet the ideas communicated by them were once universally admitted and revered by all such peoples. Not a few revere them still, making them the basis of their daily life. Such considerations seem to necessitate a less hurried judgment. The ancients, from whom we hold these traditions, which we accept no longer because we do not understand them now, must have had motives for believing in them, furnished by their greater proximity to the first ages, and which the distance that separates us from them refuses to us. Plato, in his fourth book of Laws, says that, long before the construction of the first cities, Saturn had established on earth a certain form of government under which man was very happy. As it is the Golden Age he refers to, or the reign of gods so celebrated in ancient fables, let us see the ideas he had of that happy age, and what the occasion he had to introduce his fable into a treatise on politics. According to Plato, in order to obtain clear and precise ideas on royalty, its origin and power, one has to turn back to the first principles of history and tradition. Great changes, he says, have occurred in the days of old, in heaven and on earth, and the present state of things is one of the results. Karma. Our traditions tell us of many marvels, of changes that have taken place in the course of the sun, of Saturn's reign, and of 1,000 other matters which remain scattered about in human memory, but one never hears anything of the evil which has produced those revolutions, nor of the evil which directly followed them. Yet that evil is the principle one has to talk about to be able to treat of royalty and the origin of power. That evil Plato seems to see in the sameness or co-substantiality of the natures of the rulers and the ruled. For he says that long before man built his cities in the Golden Age, there was naught but happiness on earth, for there were no needs. Why? Because Saturn, knowing that man could not rule man, without injustice filling forthwith the universe through his whims and vanity, would not allow any mortal to obtain power over his fellow creatures. To do this, the god used the same means we use ourselves with regard to our flocks. We do not place a bullock or a ram over our bullocks and rams, but give them a leader, a shepherd. An example, a being of a species quite different from their own and of a superior nature. It is just what Saturn did. He loved mankind and placed to rule over it no mortal king or prince, but spirits and genii of a divine nature more excellent than that of man. It was a god, the Logos, wrong, the synthesis of the host, who thus, presiding over the genii, became the first shepherd and leader of men. Footnote. The Secret Doctrine explains and expounds that which Plato says, for it teaches that those inventors were gods and demigods, devas and rishis, who had become, some deliberately, some forced by karma, incarnated in man. When the world had ceased to be so governed and the gods retired, ferocious beasts devoured a portion of mankind. Left to their own resources and industry, inventors then appeared among them successively, and discovered fire, wheat, wine. The public gratitude deified them. And mankind was right, as fire by friction was the first mystery of nature, the first and chief property of matter that was revealed to man. Fruits and grain, unknown to earth on that day, were brought by the lords of wisdom for the benefit of those they ruled from other locus, spheres, say the commentaries. Now, the earliest inventions of mankind are the most wondrous that the race has ever made. The first use of fire and the discovery of the methods by which it can be kindled, the domestication of animals, and above all, the processes by which the various cereals were first developed out of some wild grasses. These are all discoveries in which, in ingenuity and in importance, no subsequent discoveries may compare. They are all unknown to history, all lost in the light of an effulgent dawn. This will be doubted and denied in our proud generation. But if it is asserted that there are no grains and fruits unknown to earth, then we may remind the reader that wheat has never been found in the wild state. That is not true. It is not a product of the earth. That is not true. We have indeed traced the origin of wheat. All the other cereals have been traced to their primogenital forms of various species of wild grasses. But wheat has hitherto defied the efforts of botanists to trace it to its origin, and let us bear in mind, in this connection, how sacred was that cereal with the Egyptian priests, wheat being placed even with their mummies, and found thousands of years later in their coffins. Remember, the servants of Horus gleaned the wheat in the fields of Anru, wheat 7 cubits high. Footnote from the Book of the Dead. This is a direct reference to the esoteric division of man's principles symbolized by the divine wheat. The legend, which inscribes the third registrar of the papyrus, chapter 105 of the Book of the Dead, states, "This is the region of the manes, disembodied men, 7 cubits high, to wit, those just translated and supposed to be still sevenfold with all other principles, even the body represented astrally in the Kamaloka, or Hades, before their separation. And there is wheat 3 cubit highs for mummies in a state of perfection. In example, those already separated, whose 3 higher principles are in Devachan, who are permitted to glean it. This region, Devachan, is called the land of the rebirth of gods, and shown to be inhabited by Skeo, Tefnat, and Seb. The region for the mains 7 cubits high, yet for the imperfect mummies, and the region for those in a state of perfection, who glean wheat 3 cubits high, is as clear as possible. The Egyptians had the same esoteric philosophy which is now taught by the cis-Himalayan adepts, who, when buried, have corn and wheat placed over them. The reader is referred to stanza 7, verse 3, book 1, wherein the verse is explained in another of its meanings, and also to the Book of the Dead. I am the queen of these regions, says the Egyptian Isis. I was the first to reveal to mortals the mysteries of wheat and corn. I am she who rises in the constellation of the dog star. Rejoice, O Egypt, thou who wert my nurse. Book 1. Footnote 2. There are Egyptologists who have tried to identify Osiris with Menes, which is quite erroneous. Bunsen assigns to Menes an antiquity of 5,867 years BC, and is denounced for it by Christians. But Isis Osiris reigned in Egypt before the Dendera zodiac was painted on the ceiling of that temple, and that is over 75,000 years ago. Sirius was called the dog star. It was the star of Mercury, or Buddha, called the great instructor of mankind, before other Buddhas. The book of the Chinese Yiking attributes the discovery of agriculture to the instruction given to men by celestial genii. Woe, woe to the men who know not, observe not, nor will they see. They are all blind. Footnote 3. In the context, corked up or screwed up. Since they remain ignorant, how much of the world is full of various and invisible creatures which crowd even in the most sacred places. The sons of God have existed and do exist. From the Hindu Brahmapaturas and Manasapaturas, sons of Brahma and mind-born sons, down to the B'nai Elohim of the Jewish Bible, the faith of the centuries and universal tradition force reason to yield to such evidence. Of what value is independent criticism, so-called, or internal evidence, based usually on the respective hobbies of the critic, in the face of universal testimony which never varied throughout the historical cycles? Read esoterically the 6th chapter of Genesis, which repeats the statements of the secret doctrine, only changing slightly its form and drawing a different conclusion which clashes even with the Zohar. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God, B'nai Elohim, came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown, or giants. Footnote. Genesis 6. What does this sentence, and also after that, signify, unless it means when explained? There were giants in the earth before, in example, before the sinless sons of the third race, and also after that, when the other sons of God, lower in nature, inaugurated sexual connection on earth, as Daksha did when he saw in his Manasapaturas would not people the earth. And then comes a long break in the chapter 6 of Genesis between verses 4 and 5. For surely it was not in or through the wickedness of the mighty men, men of renown, among whom is placed Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, that God saw that the wickedness of man was great, nor in the builders of Babel, for this was after the deluge, but in the progeny of giants, who produced monstra quaedam de genera de gigantio, monsters from whence sprang the lower races of men, now represented on earth by a few miserable, dying-out tribes, and the huge anthropoid apes. And if we are taken to task by theologians, whether Protestant or Roman Catholic, We have only to refer them to their own literal text. The above quoted verse was ever a dilemma, not alone for men of science and biblical scholars, but also for priests. For as the Fatherin Peroni puts it, either they, the B'nai Elohim, were good angels, and in such case how could they fall? Or they were bad angels, and in this case could not be called B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. This biblical riddle, the real sense of which no author has ever understood, as candidly confessed by Formont, footnote 2 is Reflections, Critiques, or Originality of Ancient People, can only be explained by the occult doctrine, though through the Zohar to the western and the Book of Dizan to the eastern. What the former says we have seen. What the Zohar tells us is this. B'nai Elohim was a name common to the Malachim, the good messengers, and to the Ischin, the lower angels. Rabbi Parcham. We may add, for the benefit of the demonologist, that their Satan, the adversary, is included in Job among the sons of God, or B'nai Elohim, who visit their father. The book of Job is a good way to disprove the entirety of the Old Testament. See the Bible study. Now, the Zohar says that the Ishim, the beautiful B'nai Elohim, were not guilty, but mixed themselves with mortal men because they were sent on earth to do so. Book of Ruth and Shadash. Elsewhere, the same volume shows these B'nai Elohim belonging to the 10th subdivision of the thrones. It also explains that the Ishin, men spirits, viri spiritualis, now that men can see them no longer, help magicians to produce through their science homunculi, which are not small men, but men smaller, in the sense of inferiority, than men. Both show themselves under the form of that the Ishin had been. In example, gaseous and ethereal. Their chief is Azazel. But Azazel, whom the church dogma will associate with Satan, is nothing of the kind. Azazel is a mystery, as explained elsewhere, and it is so expressed in Maimonides. In More Novokim, there is an impenetrable mystery in the narrative concerning Azazel. And so there is, as Lancy, a librarian to the Vatican and one who ought to know, says, we have quoted him before, that this venerable divine name has become through the pen of biblical scholars a devil, a wilderness, a mountain, and a he-goat. Therefore, it seems foolish to derive the name, as Spencer does, from Ajal, separated, and El, God. Hence, one separated from God, the devil. In the Zohar, Azazel is rather the sacrificial victim than the formal adversary of Jehovah, as Spencer would have it. The amount of malicious fancy and fiction bestowed upon that host by various fanatical writers is quite extraordinary. Azazel and his host are simply the Hebrew Prometheus, and ought to be viewed from the same standpoint. The Zohar shows the Ishin chained on the mountain in the desert, allegorically, thus simply alluding to those spirits as being chained to the earth during the cycle of incarnation. Azazel, or Azazel, is one of the chiefs of the transgressing angels in Enoch, who, descending upon Ardis, the top of Mount Armon, bound themselves by swearing loyalty to each other. It is said that Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, to fabricate mirrors, to make one see what is behind him, vis-a-vis magic mirrors. Amazarach taught all the sorcerers and dividers of roots. Amers taught the solution of magic, Barkayal, astrology, Akabil, the meaning of portents and signs, Tamiel, astronomy, and Azradel taught the motion of the moon. These 7 were the first instructors of the 4th man, in example, the 4th race. But why should allegory be always understood as meaning all that its dead letter expresses? It is the symbolical representation of the great struggle between divine wisdom, nous, and its earthly reflection, suke, or between spirit and soul, in heaven and earth, in heaven because the divine monad had voluntarily exiled itself therefrom to descend for incarnating purposes to a lower plane and thus transform the animal of clay into an immortal god. For, as Eliphas Levi tells us, the angels aspire to become men, for the perfect man, the man God, is above even angels. On earth, because no sooner had spirit descended than it was strangled in the coils of matter. Strange to say, the occult teaching reverses the characters. It is the anthropomorphous archangel with the Christians and the man-like God with the Hindus, which represent matter in this case, and the dragon, or serpent, spirit. Occult symbolism furnishes the key to the mystery. Theological symbolics conceal it still more. For the former explains many a saying in the Bible and even in the New Testament which have hitherto remained incomprehensible, while the latter, owing to its dogma of Satan and his rebellion, has belittled the character and nature of its would-be infinite, absolutely perfect God, and created the greatest evil and curse on earth, belief in a personal devil. This mystery is opened with the key to its metaphysical symbolism, now restored, while that of the theological interpretation shows the gods and the archangels standing as symbols for the dead letter or dogmatic religions, and is arrayed against the pure truth of spirit, naked and unadorned with fancy. Many hints were thrown out in this direction in Isis Unveiled, which we have done in its entirety, and a still greater number of references to this mystery may be found scattered throughout these volumes. To make the point clear once for all, that which the clergy of every dogmatic religion, preeminently the Christian, points out as Satan, the enemy of God, is in reality the highest divine spirit, occult wisdom on earth, in its naturally antagonistic character to every worldly, evanescent illusion, dogmatic or ecclesiastical religions included. Thus, the Latin Church, intolerant, bigoted, and cruel to all who do not choose to be its slaves, the Church calls itself the bride of Christ and the trustee at the same time of Peter, to whom the rebuke of the Master, "Get thee behind me, Satan," was justly addressed. And again, the Protestant Church, which, by calling itself Christian, paradoxically replaces the new dispensation by the old law of Moses, which Christ openly repudiated. I don't know that that is true. Both these churches are fighting against divine truth when repudiating and slandering the dragon of esoteric, because divine, wisdom. Whenever anathematizing the Gnostic scholar Canupus, the Agathodemon, Christos, or the Theosophical Serpent of Eternity, or even the Serpent of Genesis, they are moved by the same spirit of dark fanaticism that moved the Pharisees to curse Jesus by saying to him, "Say we not well, thou hast a devil?" Read the account about Indra, Vayu, in the Rig Veda, the occult volume par excellence of Arianism, and then compare it with the same in the Puranas, the exoteric version thereof, and the purposely garbled account of the true wisdom religion. In the Rig Veda, Indra is the highest and greatest of the gods, and his soma drinking is allegorical of his highly spiritual nature. In the Puranas, Indra becomes a profligate and a regular drunkard on the soma juice, in the terrestrial way. He is the conqueror of all the enemies of the gods, the Daityas, Nagas, serpents, Asuras, all the serpent gods of the Vitrig, the cosmic serpent. Indra is the Saint Michael of the Hindu pantheon, the chief of the militant host. Turning to the Bible, we find Satan, one of the sons of God, becoming, in exoteric interpretation, the devil, and the dragon in its infernal evil sense. But in the Kabbalah, Book of Numbers, Samael, who is Satan, is shown to be identical with Saint Michael, the slayer of the dragon. How is this? For it is said that Tselem, the image, reflects alike Michael and Samael, who are one. Both proceed, it is taught, from Ruach, spirit, Neshmaka, soul, and Nefesh, life. In the Chaldean Book of Numbers, Samael is the concealed occult wisdom, and Michael the higher terrestrial wisdom, both emanating from the same source, but diverging after their issue from the mundane soul, which on earth is Mahat, intellectual understanding, or Manas, the seat of intellect. They diverge because one, Michael, is influenced by Neshkama, while the other, Samael, remains uninfluenced. This tenet was perverted by the dogmatic spirit of the church, which, loathing independent spirit, uninfluenced by the external form, hence by dogma, forthwith made of Samael Satan, the most wise and spiritual spirit of all, the adversary of its anthropomorphic God and sensual physical man, the devil. All right, that is going to bring us to the end of stanza 12, the fifth race and its divine instructors. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. Once again, it is important to maintain the things that we do know separate from the things that we speculate about. Even things which I consider to be truth to me, because they cannot be externally verified, I hold as speculation. Boaz and Joachim, that interpretation is one of those things. There are many other ones, but until there is corroboration, they will remain speculation. Many of the things that she addressed in here have valid reasons to investigate them, right? Giants. There are valid reasons to investigate the fact. There are legends of giants in every ethnicity on the planet, completely independent of all the others, right? Even in North and South America, they had legends of these giants. There is reason to look at that. They may be remnants from another race which preceded ours. That is a possibility, but it has to remain speculative. The vapor canopy can explain that, but that is speculative. It is fine to speculate about anything that you want. You just cannot assert this is fact. If you assert it is fact, you have to have something to back it up, some substantiality. And that's more than just legends, right? Now, these legends could have derived from a singular source. We have discussed that many times. I believe in Atlantis and the continent that we call Lemuria. Whether either one of them was actually named that is up for grabs, but Atlantis seems to be the more reliable historical reference. Lemuria, as far as I know, is not referenced at all outside of this. Now, I'm going to check out those two things that I popped out, see if there's new information in there. I'm always looking for new information. I am always looking to be corrected if I am wrong. Always. Even on things that I hold fairly firmly. Once upon a time, I was looking to go to a seminary and be a preacher of the Baptist denomination. Obviously, I have modified my thought patterns. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work you would like to see me read or discuss, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. Consider a membership or pick up a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.